going to be recording now, and since I stop it, you can click stop.
Where? I think it is. No?
I think it's still recording. Yeah. Just try clicking.
You don't need to say that name. You can just say, let's see.
Oh, I'll say it.
Okay.
Just click on it.
You can just click join.
Happy to do it. So are we ready? Okay, great. So I'm happy to introduce. Oh,
Might as well.
Bill Kearney. No bio needed for him.
Silvia, that's our Dean, Dr. Bill Kearney.
Hi.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is Silvia Diazgranados Ferrans, and she is going to be presenting her research presentation. The title is "The Civic Empowerment Gaps in Chile, Colombia, and Mexico: An Application of the Oaxaca Blinder Decomposition Method with Data from the 2009 International Civic and Citizenship Education Study." Quite the title. Very impressive. Also equally as impressive, give you a little information regarding Silvia. She's a visiting graduate fellow in ethics at the Edmund J. Safra Center in Tel Aviv University and a Civic Spencer Scholar at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she teaches the course Peace, Education, and a Comparative Perspective. Silvia's research focuses on identifying the multi-level factors that contribute to the development of citizenship competencies and on evaluating the effects of education programs that aim to help young people succeed in life, get along with others, participate as active members of their society, and learn to respect and value diversity. Silvia collaborates with 2 international networks of researchers working on issues of global education in countries like Colombia, Mexico, Chile, India, China, and the United States. And has been she has been leading a series of randomized controlled trials for Save the Children in Bangladesh to identify the inequality in early childhood interventions on the academic and life skills of at-risk children from the most marginalized areas of Bangladesh. Moving on, Silvia is the founder of Juegos de Paz, I pronounced that right, in Colombia, a peace education program that she implemented in partnership with the U.S.-based organization Peace First in more than 70 schools located in rural areas highly affected by multiple forms of violence. In the past, Silvia has worked as a social worker for people with disabilities in New York City and has conducted clinical and research work with victims of war and prolonged captivity from the Colombian armed conflict, and supported former child soldiers from guerrilla and paramilitary groups in their process of reintegration to civil society. She holds a BA degree in psychology and one in philosophy from the University of Los Andes, Colombia, an MA in prevention science and practice, and an EDD in human development in education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Silvia is the author of several peer-reviewed articles that explore issues related to moral decision-making, school climate, violence prevention, and citizenship education. So welcome everyone, Silvia.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. So I know that I was supposed to do an academic research presentation, but I still threw a few pictures in there because I wanted to share a little bit of my background and experience, and which as I was discussing with the committees, what really matters to me. And so I just want to quickly, okay, it's not working. Oh. Done?
China? No, that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so
Thanks.
So when I was in college, I rented a house, this house. I rented a house in a slum in Colombia for 7 years. I went to spend my weekends there to spend time with youth that were at risk of being recruited by the illegal armed groups in Colombia, because they really had no opportunities in life and they didn't see that there was any future for them different than maybe finally getting access to power through violence and many of the models of power that they had available in the community were just like the guys that have the arms, the girls, the money are coming from the guerrillas or the paramilitary, so they often join these groups. So for 7 years, I would come on the weekends to have a house where many of the young children were able to spend their days with me, basically playing. I didn't know at the time much about what I was doing, different than giving a safe place for them to have fun. And in the evenings, the gangs would come and try to brainstorm ways in which they could change the way in which the community saw them. They were perceived as the bad people, and they really wanted to show that they could make a meaningful contribution to the community. So we thought about ways together of changing their identities and have them solve neighbor. This really has influenced the rest of my career as a professional in trying to figure out ways in which young people can rethink how they can integrate themselves into society, despite the different ways in which society has not really made an effort to integrate them as well. So, so years later, I started working now with the victims of war. So many of the children who actually ended up being recruited by the guerrillas or the paramilitary to join the war. So I conducted many different projects, clinical and research work with former child soldiers, and also with also adults that were trying to come back to civil society, but they didn't have the knowledge or the skills that they needed to function, not in the context of war, but more like in a democratic society, because they had been trained to be warriors. And so I worked in the houses for the attention, reintegration, and the attention, protection, and reintegration of former child soldiers. I conducted ethnographies. One of them actually won an award. The UNICEF gave it the award for best research on infants. And with soldiers that had been kidnapped, so where they were in prolonged captivity, and they were, after 3 years, and some of them 12 years, they again needed to come back to civil society and find ways to be productive again. As well as with the adults that were trying to, that after several agreements with the government, they were also trying to come back to civil society and find ways to function as citizens and not as warriors. That work was really hard because there was a lot of trauma and post-traumatic stress, and even despite lots of effort, there was a lot of failure in actually being able to help them reintegrate themselves successfully. So at some point I started thinking about ways to, instead of working from the clinical side of things, when try to do prevention work. And so that's how because I used to be a clinical psychologist, and so I started working from the point of view of education, and I was able to work out an agreement with this organization, Peace. At the time it was called Peace Games, now it's called Peace First. It works here in Boston. There are several schools of Peace First in Boston, and I was able to translate and conduct the adaptations of the curriculum of Peace Games, which were created in the United States for places like New York, Boston, Chicago, to the rural areas of Colombia. So this is one of the schools that I have in Colombia. I have been able to, with funding from the World Bank, the European Union, the Peace Labs, the Inter-American Bank of Development, I've been able to train many, many teachers. This is the first cohort of teachers that I trained into this program, so that they could implement this curriculum that goes all the way from kindergarten to 8th grade to try to help children develop the skills they need to be peacemakers. So the knowledge, the attitudes, and the skills they need to solve conflicts in nonviolent ways, use democratic and constructive actions to change and to address the issues of social justice that are affecting their communities, and also to be able to deal in constructive ways with diversity. And so far I've been able to implement the program in 70 schools in areas that are very, very, very isolated, where many of them don't get many services, and there are some of the children that are actually at higher risk of being recruited by the illegal armed groups. So, okay. So I started doing education, and I've also, in New York City, I worked as a social worker for 3 years with people that have different types of disabilities. As I was telling the group, one of the most challenging works, even after working with child soldiers, being a social worker in New York City is more challenging than working with former child soldiers because of the incredible difficulties that people with disabilities have to face in order to actually live independent lives that are fulfilling, very rewarding work. So that's in my background. That's some of the things that I've done in the past, and I want to talk now about some of the things that I'm doing now. So in my research agenda, so right now I'm doing 3 types of things. I have 3 different types of things. I'm doing basic research with both qualitative data and with large-scale data sets, trying to identify what are the factors that are affecting the development of citizenship competencies. So citizenship competencies, I define them as like the knowledge, the attitudes, and the skills that people need to live constructively, to get along with others, to participate actively in their communities, and to appreciate diversity. So, what's the question? So basically, try to understand the factors that affect those citizenship competencies. Then I do a lot of evaluation of the effect of education programs, how they affect those citizenship competencies, among other outcomes as well, like academic success and also health outcomes, but mostly with a lot of emphasis on the development of citizenship competencies. And then I also I have a line of work where I'm trying to develop performance-based measures to assess those competencies. There's not many of the measures that are available to capture some of these skills, like, for example, perspective taking or attitudes towards diversity, are self-reports, and they suffer a lot from social desirability bias and a lot of issues where they're not great measures. And so I'm trying to develop measures that are capturing those citizenship competencies from a performance-based approach. As part of the first line, trying to identify the factors that affect the development of citizenship competencies, I'm working in the Harvard Global Education Initiative with a network of researchers from 8 different countries: the United States, Singapore, China, India, Colombia, Mexico, Chile. I was just in January in India, and so I work with researchers that the principal. There's one person for each country, so I'm the person that is conducting the case studies in Colombia, so I go to Colombia, and then I meet with the other researchers in different parts of the world to try to, we're writing some books and try, this is the first one that came out. The second one is coming out this year, and we're trying to figure out ways, like what are the best practices that are out there in the world to provide an education for people where children are being educated for the 21st century, meaning not just to know how to read and write, but actually know how to have life skills that will help them deal constructively with conflict, with issues, with diversity. I'm also part of a different network of researchers from Colombia, Chile, and Mexico, where we're using large-scale data sets, specifically the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study that was collected in 38 countries, to try to identify some of these factors and the things that affect the development of these competencies. I'm going to talk. I decided for this research presentation to focus on one of these findings. And then I have been collaborating for Save the Children for more than 5 years, and I have conducted several randomized control trials. These are my research assistants in Bangladesh. As you can see, all of them, with the exception maybe 2 people, are men. Where we're trying to evaluate the effect of some of the interventions that they have to provide better opportunities to some of the poorest and most marginalized children in one of the also poorest countries of the world. And this is something about the related to the performance-based measures. I'm collaborating with Facing History ourselves. It's an organization that works in many different places of the world, but it's based here in Boston, and we're trying to, as I said, develop performance-based measures to capture some of these citizenship competencies. Like, for example, this is a paper that just came out. It's about perspective taking, and with a case that is how children deal with bullying and exclusion, even about this study. So, okay, so that's it, just like a good thing. So now I wanted to talk about civic knowledge gaps in Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, using a method that is not very well known in the field of education, but it's increasingly being used. What does it mean to be a competent citizen? There's a lot of research in different places in the world about, and a lot of different conceptions about what it means to be a competent citizen. Most research is taking place in democratic societies. And there's a very well-known article that has influenced the thinking of many people developed by Westheimer and Kami that discuss different orientations to citizenship. One is the personal responsible citizen, who's the person that just tries to be nice, follows the rules, is obedient, helps others, volunteers. The second one is the participatory citizens, who's the person that, in addition to being nice or to others, they also try to get involved in the issues, the local and the international and the national issues that are affecting their communities. They vote, they maybe organize themselves, and they take action. And then there's also the justice-oriented citizens, who are also just, in addition to the other two things, are trying to do something to address the issues of social inequality and social injustice that are taking place in their communities. And so a competent citizen is somebody who has the knowledge, the attitudes, and the skills, different types of skills, cognitive, emotional, and communicative, that they need to be personally responsible, also participatory, and also justice-oriented. And so these are just different. I'm going to skip that, but talk about it. But these are just these are just different examples of what it means to have civic knowledge for the personally responsible. This is just examples. It doesn't need to be comprehensive or exhaustive. But I'm going to actually just skip that. Civic knowledge, civic attitudes, civic skills, civic actions in different dimensions of performance. And so I'm going to be looking at some of these examples later, so I'll just move on. But so there's a problem that is moving this research, and is the fact that there are actually gaps in the knowledge, the attitudes, and skills that people in different parts of the world have. And so, for example, Near Levinson has called attention to the fact that in the United States, there is a profound civic empowerment gap that disproportionately muffles the voice of non-white, foreign-born, and especially low-income citizens, and amplifies the voice of white, native-born, and especially wealthy citizens. The American Political Task Force has said that while low-income, less educated citizens, citizens of color, and immigrants are underrepresented in the political process, their more privileged counterparts participate more and are increasingly better organized to press their demands on the government. In turn, public officials are more responsive to the privileged than to average citizens and the less affluent, such that citizens with low or moderate income speak with a whisper that is lost to the ears of an inattentive government, while the advantaged roar with the clarity and consistency that policymakers rarely heed. So this is something that has been very well documented in the United States, but there's also evidence from large-scale assessments that this problem may be affecting, basically, and it's not surprising, young people in the rest of the world. So in this specific case, I'm trying to focus attention on what's happening in Latin America, because Latin America has been a region that has been greatly affected by violence, corruption, authoritarianism, and lots of issues. And some data from Colombia, Mexico, and Chile suggests that the gaps there may be even more concerning than what has been happening in the United States. So why should we care? Why should we care about the existence of citizenship competency gaps? Because when people from low and high, young people from low and high income backgrounds are divided in the knowledge and the skills that they have to address the problems that are affecting their communities and to make their voices heard and to participate, they are also that those gaps are reinforcing socio-political and economic systems that protect the interests of people who are already empowered, at the same time that it's ignoring the needs of the oppressed and the disenfranchised. So the citizenship competence gaps, they also constitute a threat to the legitimacy and the strength of our democracy. And in countries and regions like Latin America, who have experienced all sorts of social problems, they also had the possibility of finding peace in the years to come, finding a sustainable peace. It's also the need to provide education that is that helps people develop themselves to be competent citizens is also a human right. It's in the 26th article of the Declaration of Human Rights that says that education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening and respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial and religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. So, some research that I conducted earlier on the knowledge and the attitudes that that young people have show that these are just different dimensions of citizenship competence. There's civic knowledge, there's the sense of internal political efficacy, how competent they think they are to navigate political organizations and political systems. Their expected adult electoral participation, how much they think that they're interested in actually voting or following the work of representatives. Their expected participation in legal process, which is also a very important civic competence because, like, as justice-oriented citizens, young people should be able to identify what's wrong in their communities and try to protest and take action to make their voice heard. Their expected participation in a legal process, which is similar, but in ways that are not legal. Attitudes towards corruption. Competent citizens are supposed to be against corruption. Attitudes towards authoritarianism in the government. Competent citizens should be able to actually be critical of abuses of power as justice-oriented citizens, and so should be able to not support it. The attitudes towards disobeying the law, the attitudes towards civil disobedience. And so what you're seeing here is actually like the magnitude of the gaps in terms of the standard deviations. And when something is positive, it means that high SES students are more empowered, or actually have higher scores than low SES students. And so what we see here is that high SES students in Chile, Colombia, and Mexico have way more civic knowledge than low SES students. This is like in the range of 0.40 standard deviations. They also have a higher sense of internal political efficacy. They're also more likely to want to vote in the future, which is also going to reinforce the power they have, because that's how people effectively influence decisions. They're actually also more interested. This is all statistically significant. They're also interested in participating in legal protests, but they're less interested, significantly less interested to participate in a legal process. They also have lower attitudes towards corruption. They tend to disapprove corruption, which in a statistical significant way. They also have more negative attitudes toward authoritarianism, which is what we would expect. They also they're less likely to approve the disobedience of the law. And this thing, the attitudes towards civil disobedience, is something that is there. Actually, the things that you see there are not statistically significant. So it's the only thing where there's just no difference between high and low SES students. And so in what's coming up, I'm just going to focus on these outcomes, civic knowledge, because it's the one that's actually, more than double the size of the next gaps. So civic knowledge gaps, I'm going to focus on that outcome. So what are some of the experiences that are associated with civic gaps? We know that civic knowledge gaps, the differences between high and low SES students, are something that originate at home, because students that come from affluent backgrounds actually have families that are more interested in the political process. They are more likely to participate in the political process. They're more likely to have conversations with the children about the different issues that are affecting their communities. And in so many ways, the children who are coming from low SES families, they are just not being exposed to the resources, the environments, and the opportunities that they need to want to participate and to develop the competencies that are valued in democratic societies. We also know that schools can maintain and reinforce social equality and the gaps that are originated at home. by providing an equal access to different things, an equal access to school resources, to positive school climates, and to civic learning opportunities. So I'm going to discuss quickly a few of those. So school resources, we know that those refer to the financial and also the human capital that schools need to function and to provide a good quality education to the children. And what we know is that schools that serve wealthy children are actually, they have children that come from also higher socioeconomic backgrounds, so there's a lot of school segregation. In Latin America, as well as for the most part of the world, there's like two different systems, the public and the private, and that are providing very different opportunities. So these are things that I'm taking into account later in the study, these variables that I'm identifying. Teacher credentials, also schools that have, the schools that are attending wealthy children also have teachers that have more experience, better credentials. The class sizes are smaller, the student-teacher ratios also are favor them, and they're also located in places, in communities where there are more resources. The school climate, it's another thing that by which schools contribute to the reproduction of the civic competence gaps. The school climate refers to the quality and the character of the school life, and it's based on people's experiences of school, reflect norms, core values, interpersonal relationships, teaching and learning practices, organizational structures. And among all the literature in the school climate, there's a few variables that seem to be very salient and seem to be really having an effect on how students gain the civic competences that they need. One is school safety, another one is order and discipline, and the prevalence of social problems and the student-teacher relationships. These are all things that that are affecting how young people develop their competencies. Many of these competencies are not necessarily, even if like if you need to learn about chemistry, you actually need to go to a chemistry class, but to acquire citizenship competencies, you just need to be in the world. And whether you talk about these things or not, the way in which your teacher relates to you is actually going to shape your own values in life. And so the school climate has an effect on these competencies. And finally, learning opportunities. That's another one of the dimensions in which schools are reproducing or sometimes changing the gaps that are originating at home. They refer to a collection of diverse educational practices that some are just providing knowledge and information. That's the old way of teaching civics. It's just telling students how the government works and how things are. But then there are other more interactive practices that schools are adopting, and they have to do with involving students in civic actions and having open classrooms for discussion and discussing controversial issues that are of interest for everybody. And so I'm going to be looking at the effect of some of those practices. So in the study that I'm going to be discussing with you, I'm trying to take into account the fact that the research suggests that parents and schools are transmitting civic competence through providing access to resources, positive environments, and civic learning opportunities. And I'm trying to identify the degree to which the civic knowledge gaps, the large civic knowledge gaps that we saw, are being can be explained in terms of two things. First, the access, if there's an equal access to those things. Is there an equal access to school resources between high and low SES children? Is there an equal access to positive school climates? And is there an equal access to civic learning opportunities? This is what most research does. But then in addition to that, I'm trying to identify if once we provide equal access to everybody, are there still differences? Are children of high SES backgrounds, are they still learning more civic knowledge than children from low SES backgrounds? So I'm going to conduct some decomposition. And so the research question is, to what extent are the observed civic knowledge gaps in Chile, Colombia, and Mexico being accounted for by differences in the access that children have of these different types of school supports, and differences in the civic knowledge gains, how much they're able to gain anyway once they have equal access. Is that clear? Okay, great. So participants. So I'm using I'm using data was collected in 2009 by the International Civic and Citizenship Study. The data is available for the 14-year-old students in 38 countries, but I'm focusing only on Colombia, Chile, and Mexico. You can see here there's the number of schools per country, the number of students per country, and the number of teachers that participated in the study. The total sample for each country, 188, 177, 215 for Mexico. These are nationally representative samples in each country. And there's many outcomes. Some of those, the previous data that I showed for, like, let's say, attitudes toward authoritarianism, everything is there. But for this one study, I'm just focusing on the civic knowledge test, which is not a self-report. It's actually a test where children are being evaluated. They take approximately 2 hours to respond to 90 questions about different things. These questions some of them are open-ended questions, and they get graded on things like how much they understand certain concepts, but there are also questions about whether they actually, for example, have knowledge about human rights, which is part of being civically knowledgeable. So, and I'm using because I'm trying to identify the differences that explain the civic knowledge gaps. My key predictor is a national index of socioeconomic status that was conducted through complementary factor analysis. It's available in the data set already. I didn't have to do those. I didn't have to create that scale myself, but it takes into account the highest level of the parental education, the highest level of parental occupational status, and the number of books at home. And then I'm using a lot of covariates which are related to the things that I discussed before. Some things that are related to the individual family background, for example, whether parents are having conversations with the children about socio-political issues, and how much they're interested in resources. I'll show those things in a minute. Vector covariates for school climate and a vector covariates for civic learning opportunities. I relate to specifically the things that were salient in the literature. So here we can see that that's just a table with the means and the medians and the Cronbach's alpha. Forget about it. For the individual family, we have gender, age, parents' interest in politics, frequency with which parents talk about politics with children. For the school resources, I'm taking into account the school SES, which is just like some measure of socioeconomic segregation. Whether the school is private or public, student-teacher ratio, resources available in the community where the school is located. For school climate, the same measures we discussed, whether it's the safety of the schools, positive student-teacher relationships, whether the behavior of the students, the prevalence of social problems in the school. For the civic learning opportunities, I'm taking into account whether there's an open classroom for discussion, frequency of civic discussions in the classroom, opportunities for civic action, and opportunities for community service learning. So the analytic strategy I'm using, this is called the Oaxaca blended decomposition method. Most studies use regression analysis, and this is actually taking a step beyond regression analysis. A traditional regression will tell you what is the relationship between a variable once you control for everything else. And what this method is doing, it's actually going to show how a specific gap, in this case a civic knowledge gap, the difference between what a student in high SES knows and a student in a low SES knows, how that gap can be decomposed into two parts. The first part, which is, so here is like the normal regression, right? And I first have to conduct all the analysis where, I have the civic knowledge gap for student I in a school, in a given school, in a given country, controlling for a vector of individual family factors, school resources, school climate, and civic learning opportunities. These are all vectors. But then I take a step beyond, in which I'm decomposing the gap into two components. First is the proportion of the gap that is due to differences in characteristics. And then what that means is that it's reflecting unequal access to learning support. And so when I look at that, and we're going to see it, it's going to show me the mean increase that we would observe in the civic knowledge of a low SES student had they had access to the same school resources, same positive school climate, and same civic learning opportunities as a high SES student. So like, given equal access, what we would observe. And then we have a second component, which is that one, which is going to show me the proportion of the gap that is due to differences in what students of different SES backgrounds are able to learn. And so, assuming equal access. So once you have equal access, once you're able to simulate through some analysis equal access, are they still gaining this? Are they now learning the same, or are some still be able to learn more for maybe other reasons that are not access? So this is a table. I'm going to skip it because I have graphs, but this is like what the results would show. So this is this is the first thing that we're going to see for different countries. So we have, what you see in blue is the proportion of the gap that is due to differences in the access, right? And so we see that in Chile, only 27% of the gap, the civic knowledge gap, is due to differences in the access to those things, to school resources, school climate, and civic learning opportunities. In Colombia, 60% is due to unequal access, and 67% in Mexico is due to unequal access. So that means that as a policymaker, like when you look at the composition of the gap, you need to use very different strategies for these three countries because the gap is composed by very different things. Like, so if as a policymaker, you try to create an intervention that is going to provide equal access to Chilean students, really, you're only going to be able to close 27% of this gap by providing an equal access, because there's 73% that is due to returns, which means that once you have equal access, students of high SES backgrounds are still learning more for other reasons, and we're going to discuss that. The same in Colombia. In Colombia, it's a very different profile, the same as in Mexico. Like, so much of the difference is due to unequal access that you may want to actually create an intervention that addresses unequal access. Any questions? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about this part. So look at the blue. For each country, I'm going to show how I'm going to focus on the things that are explaining the blue part, what's called the explained component. So what is the part that is due to unequal access? And so again, here it's just to remind you that in Chile, 27% is due to, this is how I decompose it in terms of school resources, school climate, and civic learning opportunities. In Colombia, 60%, in Mexico, 67%. But so what we see here is that, first of all, in the three countries, most of the gap is being explained, most of the gap that is due to differences in access is being explained by unequal access to resources, to school resources, as opposed to unequal access to positive school climates, or as opposed to unequal access to civic learning opportunities. So most is due to school resources. And if I was gonna, and I didn't put it here, but if I was going to show even in more detail the variables, these blue parts in each of the countries, within that there's like unequal access to resources available in the community, school SES, but most of that part is actually due to school segregation. Okay, so so what you see is that unequal access to school resources is driving most of the explained component of the gap. Now I'm going to go. So now I'm going to go back to the red, and I'm going to look at what are the things that are being what are the things that are important for the unexplained component of the gap. And this is what we see. So when you see something positive, like in the case of Chile, it means that high SES students, once they have access to the same resources, once access is exactly the same, high SES students are able to gain more civic knowledge than low SES students. So they're still able to gain more knowledge. for some reason. When you see it's negative, it means that low SES students, once they have access to the same things, now they are the ones who are learning more, okay? And so in this case, what we observe is that the results are more mixed. High SES students in Chile, once they have equal access, they're still learning more. In Colombia, once there's equal access to school resources, low SES students are learning more. So like this means that, because it's negative, school children in Colombia, and only in Colombia in this case, they're being able to convert more effectively the school resources that they have into civic knowledge. And in both countries, in Colombia and Mexico, school climate seems to have like a very positive impact on the civic knowledge that children have once they have equal access. And civic learning opportunities seem to be having a very differential effect in the different countries. But as a whole, school climate is the one that is having more effect. Is this clear? Any questions so far? Okay. So this is what we see in terms of like the decomposition. This is what I'm trying to. So this blue part is being explained in the case of Chile. You can see here that the unequal access being explained here, but mostly by differences in access to resources. You see that 19% of this gap of the total gap is being explained by differences in access to resources. And on this side, you see like the unexplained gap is being the unexplained component of the civic knowledge gap in Chile is mostly due to differences in school climate and civic learning opportunities. This is the profile for Colombia. Again, for the characteristics, most of the explained gap is school resources. And in the case of the unexplained gap, and this is interesting that you try to see, is that most of the unexplained gap is being due to differences in civic learning opportunities and family background. But the red and the green, which are school resources and school climate, are actually helping lower SES students. So if it wasn't for those two things, the gap would be way larger. And this is the case for the civic knowledge gap in Mexico, which is similar to Colombia. You have these two things that if it wasn't for the school resources and the school climate characteristics of low SES students, the gap would be way, way longer. So the implications again is like if you were going to, if a policymaker in this case, if they were going to address unequal access, they would be able to close at least 67% of the gap. But that's it. We need to do completely different types of interventions if they were going to close the other type of the gap. And so, for example, I'm going to discuss that a little later. So the big picture is that there's civic competence gaps dividing young people in Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, which affect their ability to act as personally responsible, participatory, and justice-oriented citizens. Those gaps can be decomposed into variance that is due to unequal access to school support, and also another component that is due to differences in the civic knowledge gains that students can obtain, students from different SES backgrounds can obtain for other reasons. The decomposition varies significantly country by country, and in order to close the gap, policymakers and educators really need to consider the specific composition. And so interventions can aim to do their very different things. First, address the lack of access to the different supports. Address the differences in the quality of the different supports. So like once you address the access, you still need to be able to close the unexplained component. You need to conduct more research to see whether there may be two different reasons why access is not explaining. One is that actually they may have access, but the quality is different in the sense that the underlying values that are driving the interactions are different. And so, for example, the literature says that high SES students, even if they have equal access to support, some are being educated to become leaders and adopt the role as powerful citizens, but lower SES students are being educated to just comply and follow the rules and not question the status quo. And so you need to address the differences in quality. And another reason why students of high SGS backgrounds may be still gaining more civic knowledge gains once they have access to the same resources is that they still have like the cultural capital that they need because of their families to actually use those resources and to take better advantage of the resources that are already available to them. So some implications in the three countries: high SGS students have more access to support, and so countries really need to address those disparities. They need to do something to be able to address unequal access. That's in the three countries unequal access is happening. In Chile, high SGS students obtain higher civic knowledge gains from equal school support, and so Chile, in addition to addressing unequal access, which in their case is just small, the most of the gap is being explained by other things. In Chile, policymakers need to be able to address the quality of the education that different students are getting. In Colombia and Mexico, policymakers could really benefit from providing same access to things with a lot of emphasis on positive school climate and civic learning opportunities, which are the two variables that are explaining most of the gap. So interventions tend to increase access to resources, increase access to resources to which low SGS students are already obtaining very high benefits, and also they can try to create interventions that alter the quality of the support from which low SGS students are not learning. So some limitations is that the data from the ICCS study is not experimental, it's observational, and so it's very important to, as we know, to be careful about making causal claims. But the same method can be used with experimental data to decompose a given gap using data from randomized control experiments where you can actually make causal claims. In terms of external validity, the data comes from national representative samples, so we know that we can be certain that can be generalized to these three countries, but not beyond the Colombia, Chile, and Mexico, and not beyond the age range that we have, which is young people, 14-year-olds from the 2009 cohort, and also not to other different outcomes different than civic knowledge. Like things may look completely different. For example, attitudes towards authoritarianism or high political sense of political engagement. Let's see. Yes. Questions?
Who's on the phone? Who's on the phone?
Actually, it just looks like it's Rafi and myself.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's 10 minutes after 3. We have a little bit of time to open up for discussion.
So I'm of course fascinated with this, especially since part of it was on human rights and education. I'm interested in if these countries are actually interested in this kind of curriculum on citizenship, or if this is just international organizations that are interested in promoting democracy in this country. Like are national governments actually want citizenship education in schools and are working on it and to see these things as important? Because I feel like here, not that I'm that involved in both systems, but the focus really is more on developing skills that students can use to get jobs, and that civic education is really not the priority anymore.
Yeah. So that's true. And Colombia, my country, given the long history of problems that we've had, it's actually the pioneer country in the world in terms of citizenship education. So Colombia, in the year 2004, it did something that was incredible, and it had a lot of policymakers, educators, research, parents, students, and different people come together to discuss what are the minimum skills that every Colombian student should have. And they created what's called the National Standards of Citizenship Education, where they identify all the way from kindergarten up until 11th grade. We only have 11 grades in Colombia. They identify what are those skills. And not just that, but they actually have a national test of citizenship competencies where students, in addition to being evaluated on math and language, the traditional things that everybody cares about, they're being evaluated on their ability to solve conflicts in nonviolent ways, and things like, for example, perspective taking, empathy, negotiation skills. They're being evaluated on their attitudes towards diversity, so towards people with disabilities. There's actually a scale in the national test about the attitudes of people towards people with disabilities, towards people, and I have other studies showing these gaps on I did a study, just not in Colombia, Chile, and Mexico, but with data from 23 countries in the European Union showing the attitudes that people have toward immigrants and toward minorities, because that's a big issue in the European Union these days. But it's in part of the standards, to say the least. It's part of the Colombian standards. So, and the kids also need to report their attitudes, just self-reports, unfortunately. So that needs to change. But yeah, attitudes toward diversity and also their attitudes towards participation. Those are the three things that Colombia is evaluating. So there's that. Mexico, and it's of high priority for the country. And Colombia is my own program, the Juegos de Paz program. It's the reason why I'm able to get so much money from the World Bank to implement this program is that because Colombia assembled a portfolio of the best programs in the world that are helping children develop skills and these attitudes and acquire this knowledge. And so they identify different programs, one of them being Peace Games, and that's why I was able to get funding to, also, through different resources, but the World Bank had money there to pilot and to adapt and to evaluate the effect of those programs on the competencies of children. And there are several programs. Colombia identified the best national practices and best international practices and have piloted them and have given them what's called high priority. In Mexico also has high priority for these programs. Mexico is going, it used to be that, we in Colombia have been 60 years at war, but Mexico that wasn't the case. They've had the longest democracy in the Latin American region, except that it's always been one party in the government for like 60 years, so it's like the perfect dictatorship in the sense that it's been criticized because the government doesn't really allow for a lot of changes. But and Chile, so Mexico has also a high priority and for citizenship education, and that's not the case in Chile. And so Chile has a very different attitude towards citizenship education. Their approach to citizenship education is just providing information so that students know how the government works and the three branches of government and all those things. In Colombia and Mexico, the approach is not just provide knowledge, but help children develop skills, develop attitudes, and engaging in interactive education. In Chile, which is interesting, it's like where you see that the gaps actually are when you look at the gaps here. Chile always has the largest gaps between high and low SES students, but also because the citizenship education in Chile is not a high priority, and it also depends on whether specific schools decide to do something about it or not. Those schools that are already providing the best education are also the ones that are helping children get the best civic education. That's not the case in Colombia and Mexico, where there are national policies to empower children with those skills, and everybody has to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering how the United Nations has just in the last few years had this mandate for global citizenship in education. I was wondering how that United Nations mandate fitted in, whether it was sort of similar to or different from or integrated with that sort of rollout.
Yeah, it's it's consistent, except that many of the skills for global education it goes a little beyond citizenship education, which because in the sense that it requires, for example, how to manage technology and do an additional set of skills that the citizenship education is not doing. But in any case, it's both preparing children to live in a globalized world, and there's a lot of exposure to diversity and to different opinions, and so those things are aligned. But there are certain other aspects that are not quite exactly that citizenship education is not providing a response to. But yeah.
Okay, so they're pretty much aligned except for the additional sort of... Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
What would you hope would be, let's say in an ideal world, the impact of this research?
Would you mind just repeating the question?
What?
Would you mind just repeating the question when someone asks you the question?
To repeat the question, yes. So what would I think would be the effect of this type of research?
Yes, in an ideal world, what would you hope would be the impact of this kind of research?
Well, there's two different things. I mean, one is like something as simple as visualizing the differences in the just changing the conversation to other outcomes that are important for children and for young people, some of the other skills that are important to develop beyond the traditional math and language. There's other things that are important for us for students to develop if they're going to live in a diverse world, and if they're going to be able to take action, to take a stand against the issues of social inequality and injustice in their communities, and to be able to participate and provide solutions to the things that affect their communities. You need to start changing the conversations and discuss other outcomes in education. So that's one. So just visualizing other sets of outcomes. Now, in terms of the actual composition, in terms of the actual decomposition, it's just to gain a little more sophistication in terms of like where, as simple as like how do you invest your money? You know, like for example, if you as an educator and as a policymaker, you want to create, like let's say you already jumped in the train of citizenship education, but you may be investing if you try to use the strategy that would work for Chile in Mexico, you're wasting your money. You need to be able to understand how like what is the situation in your specific context, and how do you best address the needs of a given context in terms of like what are the things that are driving the differences in performance in outcomes that we think are valuable. And so again, you know, you may decide I'm going to create, or I'm going to fund all these initiatives that are going to provide an equal access, but if access is already the same, but the things that is driving the gaps are not access, but actually the fact that the values that are underlying the resources that you're providing and that are regulating how teachers interact with their students are different, that's what you need to address. So like in Chile, where you see that only 23 or 27% is access and the other is differences in the quality, you need to try to go there and understand how are teachers relating to their students. For example, some research says that you may have the same initiative, but like if you go on, you see that in a given classroom, you have a teacher that is engaging students in conversations and asking questions and helping them think. And it's very different than when you have a teacher that's just giving directions and instructions and just help them to occupy that role in society where they just need to obey and comply versus like versus being critical thinkers. And so how do you address the different needs? It may be that You know, in Mexico, you need to provide more access. 67% is about access. In Chile, almost the same, you know, a great amount has to do with differences in the actual quality of those resources that children already have available. So it just guides the types of interventions that you want to do in different.
To what Tess has just asked. So I think we know that the economic and educational disparities in these countries, Chile, Mexico, and Colombia, are deeply entrenched. How would you articulate the importance of this particular method, research methodology or approach in addressing the complex historical, social, economic problems in these countries, and also what is the importance of this methodology in terms of enabling you to take the maximum impact in terms of intervention? And I think there is something very fascinating about this methodology. So around the table here actually are faculty and students and staff coming from very different disciplinary backgrounds. So I think if you can speak a little directly to this question, it will help everybody kind of fully understand the importance of this particular methodology.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat myself, but I will, I guess.
Yeah.
So most research that tries to understand the relationship of a variable with a different outcome. It's just like it'll show, like if I do a normal regression, which is what most people are acquainted with, it's just going to show that if I have smaller class size, I'm going to have a little more civic knowledge. That's it. But using this method, I'm actually able to take a gap as opposed to just an outcome. I can take a gap that exists in a given country. So like in Colombia, you know, like let's say, you know, taking this gap in Chile or this gap in Colombia as opposed to just a given variable. And I'm able to just decompose that gap and try to understand what are the different, you know, variables that are actually creating that gap in that one context, right? And so again, and I can see, well, this gap is due to differences in access to the variables that you have identified as important in the literature. In this case, everything that I used to create a school climate, everything that I used to create civic learning opportunities, and everything that I used to create a school resources, right? And you can see how unequal access to those things is driving the gap, and how other, not unequal access, but how students are able to once they have equal access, how they're able to transform the availability of those supports into civic knowledge. Why? Because their background actually already makes them understand the importance of it, right? And so they're better able to take advantage of the resources that they already have available in the community. Or another reason why the second part of the gap, so there's the unequal access and there's the unexplained component, or what the differences in the quality of the resources that they have are driving the access. So in a way, it helps people creating interventions be able to address in a more targeted way the gap that, because for example, I may know that research shows that an open classroom for discussions is associated to more civic knowledge, and I may know that, but it may be that in Colombia that's not a problem anyway, that everybody's having equal access and everybody's benefiting, and if I want to close the Colombian gap, I actually need to provide to do something to reduce school segregation, because it may not be about providing students with an open classroom for discussion in that context. It may be that that's not a problem already. So a policymaker can be, research says that open classroom for discussion is associated with high civic knowledge, and fund a lot of that type of research. But in that context, that may be something that is not problematic. You may need to address something else. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. I have a few questions. One is with respect to sort of following up a little bit on the question that Tess asked as well. So have you been able to get access to the government and the policymakers in these countries in order to share your findings and your proposals? So I guess just kind of wondering, like, I suppose if you haven't already had that opportunity, how do you hope or intend that you might be able to kind of negotiate that process of trying to translate your findings into actual practice? So I don't know if, you know, you're sort of in that camp with respect to, you know, what academics do, the sort of action side, maybe even translating your work through some sort of advocacy mechanisms or whatever. So that's the one question. And then the second question is more a methodological question. And so you said in passing, when you were sharing your photographs, you kind of giggled a little bit when you said that the Bangladeshi research assistants or people who are gathering the data are predominantly male. And I guess I figure that there must be some sort of reflection behind your, you know, your the way in which you sort of said that. And so I guess I'm just kind of wondering a little bit about, you know, maybe you can share why that is, and you know, what your particular approach is to that, or if there are any attempts that you all have made to kind of push back a little bit about what I assume are maybe cultural dynamics that dictate that it tends to be a male person to make that, or maybe you're not even involved in selecting the people who are actually collecting the data. So yeah, just a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Where to start? I already forgot the first question. What was the first question? Let me start with the second question, sure. And then we'll go to the. You remind me of the first question.
Sure.
Yeah, that one thing. It's interesting. Bangladesh is a society where women are highly undervalued, and there's a lot of issues with education for girls. And but Save the Children has all the interventions they have really try to address that problem, because there's so much research showing the benefits of educating girls. Like you can change the world. Like, it's the best investment you can do for a society. Is like, just educate the girl. You educate a girl, and that, you know, the health, success, everything is going to be better in the future, right? And so Save the Children knows that, and a lot of the interventions that they have are trying to improve the access and the opportunities and the quality of the education that girls are getting. Interestingly, when it comes to the people that Save the Children hires, in many ways, and for that picture, but that's changing. In that picture, which was probably the first or second project I had with them, all my research assistants were guys. One of the reasons is because when Save the Children puts out a call for, like, they want to hire people, even if as an organization they would like to give preference to women as well, to also just change the way things are by changing the way they hire in the organization, they still have a lot of problems trying to get applications for women, because for this type of projects, my research assistants have to travel to different communities, and it's not safe for women in Bangladesh to travel to different communities, and the families will not allow them to do that, and even if they allow them, it's just not safe. So recently, like in the current project I have, I'm currently evaluating to promote literacy. reading comprehension and the traditional things. But the research is there's a lot more girls, and Save the Children is trying to have them travel in groups of 3, just as a way to change things around. So maybe right now at least 30% of the research assistants I have are girls. Things are changing a little bit because of the support that Save the Children is putting to them. They're facilitating things. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the first question is about like what efforts you are engaged in getting this research.
Yeah. Well, I'm lucky in that regard. It's the work I'm conducting with these citizenship education projects is actually the opposite of what happens usually in academia, where things never get to the policymakers. It's the opposite, and it's the opposite because the government because there's such a good match, and the government is really trying to promote this type of they're collecting the data. I'm actually using data from an international data set, but I have conducted other studies with the Colombian test of citizenship competencies, and so there's a lot. They're very eager. They know that the people who are designing the public policies are the actual researchers and educators that are conducting some of these initiatives. Everybody at the Ministry of Education in Colombia knows the work I'm doing. They want to have the findings. They're very well informed. Sort of like a community between researchers and policymakers in Colombia. For this one project, the funding comes from the National Institute of Science in Mexico. So because again, they are interested as well because Mexico also has citizenship education is of high priority, and so they're also interested in getting information and using the data that is available to see how they can inform their policies. We have a book coming out. There's going to be it's probably coming out at the end of this year, but there's a lot of interest in the government to see the results. Chile is not the same, although this project is being done in Mexico. It's with the Universidad Autónoma de Mexico. It's one university, the biggest one there. In Chile, it's Diego Portales. It's a smaller university, but the people there are well connected with policymakers, but that's less interested. It's mostly Colombia and Mexico where they really want all the results, and they're always eagerly awaiting for that. Every project I've done in regards to citizenship education I feel like it has been well received and is informing policymakers in my country. Yeah.
So again, in relation to your work with education innovation initiative,
in what?
Global education.
Yeah.
Do you see there are some lessons that each country can learn from each other? Like, are there something that are happening in Chile which China can learn?
That's the whole idea. It's like we are. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to extract the lessons, and this is all qualitative data. We have in the project that we have identified organizations that are doing phenomenal work in promoting 21st century skills. Like for example, in each country we identified 15 organizations that are doing phenomenal work, and we have conversations with them, and then we choose maybe one that is like doing incredible work, and we are collecting interviews to try to learn from them and extract their wisdom, and then so that happens for each country. We're conducting case studies, so like what are they doing to promote all these 21st century skills, and then we spent a lot of time, the teams from these 8 countries, just trying to see what's the same and trying to see what's different and trying to extract the lessons and you know so there's a lot of that. That's the whole idea of the study, is like trying to understand if there's something what we call like the DNA of the 21st century skills. If there's something that every organization that is doing this work will there something common about that? Is there like something like a DNA or not?
Is it too premature to ask for any specific findings that you have had so far?
Any specific one?
Any specific findings from this collaboration?
No, I can share a few things. So, for example, one thing we know that educating for the 21st century, it requires building and sustaining relationships. Like, for example, the type of interventions which happens everywhere. Even sometimes, even my own program in Colombia, I get funding, and what happens is that I go and I do a 5-day training for a set of teachers, and then now they're trained and they go back, they implement the program, and maybe I visit them, which I do, and I see how things are going, and we follow up with a different training 6 months later, and then I visit them again, and then after a year, they're on their own. And so the idea that like conducting some trainings and leaving people then to see how that the organizations that are doing things very, very well are not using that type of model. They're using a model of like ongoing support, and they have figured out ways to, I mean, for example, the Colombian model is very interesting because they have figured out a way where they don't really depend on them on funding to actually have to create a network of teachers who get together and who are continuously growing and learning from each other. And it does not depend on like getting together for 5 days. It's just like a thing that where they're continuously providing feedback for each other and testing new ideas and trying them out and questioning the things, and it goes on for years. It doesn't go on for the year where you have funding. It just keeps going. That's one thing. Another one is that they are usually highly democratic organizations. So when you educate for the 21st century, you educate children using interactive activities and open classroom for discussions, and everybody has a voice, and if that happens between the students and the teachers. But that's also happening at the higher level between the teachers and the principal, and that's also happening at a higher level between the principals and the political system, where like everybody seems to be highly empowered, everybody seems to have a voice, everybody feels like what they do has an impact on the organization as a whole. So they're highly democratic organizations. So there's like no quick solutions for 21st century students. You need to build relationships to sustain them, to provide mechanisms for ongoing support and growth, and in ways that are highly democratic. That's a few things. But yeah. Yes.
Are there opportunities for the countries to learn from each other on an ongoing basis?
We're trying. The reasons why we're doing these books is actually to create networks, and so like these global education initiatives has the component of like having books out where we're learning from each other and we're learning those lessons, we're trying to extract them. But we're also, every time we go to a different country, like I was there in January, and one thing we do is to actually create those networks, like within countries and between countries. And so, for example, even though we're studying within each country one organization, whenever we go to a specific country, we make sure to invite 20 different organizations so that they get to know each other and they start sharing with each other and they start doing those things with each other. And then between countries, we're also creating platforms, technology-wise platforms, so there's to continue the conversations between these organizations and so that they can learn from each other and they can, using technology, share more lessons and visualize their work, and hopefully, little by little, start changing the conversations that are happening about what it means to educate well, because the dominant discourse in most of the world continues to be, it's about the math and the language situation. So we want to change like strategically, like the dominant discourse, and try to have people like learn from each other and be like, oh, you're doing that, this, we're doing the same, it's actually the same, and then get together and we're trying to visualize their work through the online platforms and the conversations, and yeah. So it goes beyond the actual books and case studies. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so that takes us to round 3:45. Let's give Silvia another round of applause for sharing her very important work and this very innovation with us. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have a little bit of time if anybody wants to interact with Sophia or with each other. We have another 5-10 minutes, and your feedback is very important to us. So please let us know what you think. Thank you so much.
Let me quickly say that the case study in Colombia, since there's such emphasis here in people with disabilities, the case study in Colombia is fascinating that way, because the methods that they're using to educate people is actually, they have created this methodology as well that is very inclusive, and it helps, it respects different rhythms of learning, and it promotes collaboration and between people. And like when I visited these schools, all the teachers, I asked them how, what the project does and the models that they have. They always talk about how it's helping children express themselves very well and become leaders and cooperate, But whenever I ask the students about what the program is doing for them it's all about, it's helping me value diversity, and it's helping me know how to include others that are very, very different than me. And the model is interesting. That's a whole different conversation. But it's one of those very interesting outcomes, how the program actually involves within the same teams of people, like people with different types of disabilities in a way that's kind of fascinating. So.
Thank you.